Hey everybody, what is going on? Hexlex here. Got another Master Duel video for you, coming at you with a tier list now that the latest selection pack is in the game and the ban list has taken effect. This has been quite a huge shakeup to the Master Duel meta. And before we get started ranking stuff, I'm just gonna say up front, I think this is one of the most diverse metas we've been in within the last year. I was thinking, ahead of time about where I was gonna put all these decks, and I realized that not only do I think there are actually a lot of contenders for Tier 1, I kind of think the line between Tier 1 and Tier 2 is pretty thin nowadays, meaning that there are quite a few different decks that you could use to have a lot of success in the current metagame. I've only got 25 of them here, but definitely there are more that you could absolutely top tournaments or hit Master 1 with. So if you like a deck that isn't featured here, that doesn't mean I think it's bad or necessarily like worse than Rogue tier. It just, we only have time to go over so many decks. So I picked 25 of the most popular / powerful for us to review. Let's not waste any more time and get right on into it. Starting with Sky Striker. So I played with Sky Striker a fair bit. Did a little testing session with it, had a video that I went out with it, and even somebody like me who's not very good at playing a deck like Sky Striker, I was able to see the difference in power level. So I'm inclined to call Sky Striker a Tier 2 deck, which is quite a huge jump up from Rogue, but really Ace Zero and Lemniscate add so much of what Sky Striker needed to stay competitive that I really do think it does end up jumping up a couple of ratings here on the tier list. There's a part of me that actually kind of wants to put it in Tier 3, because I do think it is some weaker than some of these other decks that got new support. But I think for the time being, I'll keep it in Tier 2, and as always, as I add stuff, I might end up moving things around. But I think Blue Eyes also remains a very solid Tier 2 deck, actually one of the better ones going into this format. For me, I think Blue Eyes is probably going to be the top of Tier 2, because it's kind of like, I think the line between what a Tier 1 deck and a Tier 2 deck can do is pretty perfectly drawn right now at Blue Eyes, right? Blue Eyes has one pretty rigid but very solid combo line that it tends to stick to. Whether or not it can push through negates kind of depends on your hand a little bit, whereas some of these other Tier 1 decks we're going to talk about can naturally play through one or sometimes even multiple hand traps even without extenders. So yeah, I think that's going to be one of the key differences to me between a Tier 1 and a Tier 2 deck. And I think Blue Eyes is very, very powerful, and again, probably the top of Tier 2, but I think it does remain a Tier 2 deck. Crystron is a deck that I really like and have been meaning to come back to. I think it's actually really solid right now, a good Tier 3 deck, mostly because Lancia is not seeing nearly as much play. I actually still think Lancia is a fine card to play as a hand trap, not just against Malice, of course, but there's also Orcus, and a lot of decks do a lot of incidental banishing, even some of the newer ones like Lunalight, for example, right? They do some amount of incidental banishing they need to do for their combo line. But anyway, yeah, with less Lancias in the meta, Crystron can really start to creep back up in terms of both representation and power. I do think it is a little bit lacking compared to some other decks in the meta, that's why I have it in Tier 3, but I still think it's a really solid deck overall. Alright, so Fiendsmith Yubel, or just Yubel decks in general. The biggest thing they lost on the ban list was Appaloosa. I mean, everybody lost Appaloosa, but, Yubel tended to end on Appaloosa a lot, or at least that's what I've seen a lot of people say. In my experience in research doing deck building and also playing Yubel, I found Appaloosa to be very optional. And there have been a lot of times where I have chosen not to play it, and I've also seen a lot of tournament-topping Yubel lists that chose not to play Appaloosa while it was legal. So I don't think losing Appaloosa is like a death sentence for Yubel. I think it's still a pretty solid Tier 3 deck. Maybe a little bit less powerful than something like Crystron, just in general, but still very solid. Sprite, as much as I do love it, I would love to put it in Tier 3. I think I have to put it at the top of Rogue. This is kind of like encapsulating all of its variants, although to be fair, it's usually pretty much pure or Fiendsmith Sprite you see nowadays, and a lot of people are actually opting for pure because of the ability to play Dominus Impulse, which is a really good hand trap right now. So I don't know, there is a part of me that wants to put Sprite in Tier 3, but if I'm being completely honest and objective, I think it is actually just a Rogue deck. Again, decks that are Rogue are not bad by any means. All of these Rogue decks are more than capable of topping tournaments and or hitting Master 1. But not quite as powerful as tiered decks. And I think Monarch is going to fall into this category as well. Monarch did receive some new support that it very does much appreciate. However, I don't think it's enough to make Monarch a tiered threat. I think it's one of those waves of support where it helps the deck keep up with the meta, right? But it doesn't necessarily change its place within the meta. So, although Monarch was kind of slipping from upper to lower rogue just over time due to power creep, this new support will keep it back in upper rogue. But I think it will remain a rogue deck for now. Centurion, I'm going to put in tier 3. I think somewhere between Crystron and Yubel. I think all three of these decks are decently equal power level, with Crystron being notably a little stronger than the other two. Centurion is a little bit more flexible in what and how it can play. Like Magistus Centurion, for example, you can play Mitsurugi Centurion, just because Centurion just really cares mostly about synchroing and the materials, or the synchro monsters that are rather have generic material requirements. So as long as you've got level 4 or 8 non-tuner bodies, you can always use Centurion to pair with those, and there are quite a few of those out there. So I think that Centurion is one of those decks where even if it doesn't get any new support, it can actually adopt so many different variants and adaptations that is what can help it stay relevant in the metagame. But that said, I do think it is still a tier 3 deck right now. Tearlament is a very interesting case here. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of tier 2, but I think much like Blue Eyes, this might end up being my buffer between tier 2 and tier 3. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Tearlament's biggest weakness nowadays is definitely the fact that it is a somewhat high rolly deck, right? Like, even after Tearlament got all of its hits and, wasn't tier 0 anymore, it was still keeping up with the meta despite relying on mills, because even if you didn't mill very well at the time, the power of the end board was still relatively on par with what other decks were doing. But nowadays, I don't know, I feel like at least more and more as time goes on that, like, in order for Tearlament to keep up, you do need to actually be milling good cards, right? Like, it used to be that if you kind of just ended on, like, Roll Close and maybe, like, a Solic or something, that plus your graveyard stuff would be enough to carry you to a win. But I'm not finding that's the case nearly as much anymore, right? When I'm facing up against Tearlaments and I'm playing one of these, like, tier 1 or tier 2 decks, I'm finding myself thinking that when they end on something like Roll Close plus Solic, like, okay, that's it, that's fine, I can push through that. So I think I answered my own question. I think I'm going to leave Tearlaments at the top of tier 3 for now. I could see a very solid argument for it being tier 2, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to leave it here for the time being. Okay, Mathmech, I'm going to put in tier 3 with a lot of these. All the last ones have been tier 3. I'm going to put in tier 3 with a lot of these other decks. I might even put it a little bit above Yubel, though, because Mathmech did actually get a very nice buff with the new Ignister support. Of course, a lot of Cybers decks did, but that does not exclude Mathmech, which has been notably better in the times I've been testing it since that new Ignister support. So I was putting in Rogue for a while, but I think that the power boost was enough to actually make it a tiered deck. Maybe just barely, but a tiered deck once again. Alright, Stun is something we've been seeing a lot more of lately and a lot more variants of with the release of the Morganite cards, right? The new Morganite cards, well, there was a new one that just came out, but that's the one I think that allows you to cheat out tribute monsters without actually having to tribute, which does open up some more floodgate options for stuff like Vanities or Majesty's Ruler, more floodgate monsters like that. So I think that was actually a solid power buff for Stun, but not enough to carry it out of a Rogue tier. At the end of the day, like, yeah, it sucks going up against Stun. It's not fun, but it's rough actually trying to play Stun to some success, right? Your going second games are always going to be a huge major uphill battle, and as annoying as it is to play against Stun going first, them going first isn't even a guarantee that they're going to win the game, right? Whether they brick, or you have something like Imperm, or some of the random negate, or if they have a barrier statue and you just happen to have the attributes for that statue, it's rough. It can be rough for Stun. That's why it's a rogue deck. But of course, like I said, that doesn't make it any less annoying. All right, Fiendsmith Control, Bestial Fiendsmith Control, these style of decks represented by Engraver here. I think I'm gonna put those towards the bottom of tier 2. And some people might think like, oh, I don't, might not agree that these are more powerful than Tearlaments, but I think what these Fiendsmith / Bestial Control style decks lack in power, they make up for in their versatility, right? their ability to play various hand traps and other techs against the meta, be very malleable in terms of not only what techs you're using, but also engines, right? Even stuff like, Primite is very optional. How many Fiendsmith cards you play is very optional. You can choose to play Millennium in a deck like this. There's a ton of different things you could do, right? So I really like that flexibility, and I think that's what's keeping Fiendsmith Control very, very relevant in this meta. Okay, Mitsurugi Orcus. I think this is actually going to be the first deck I put in Tier 1, but this might end up being towards the bottom of Tier 1. I don't know. We'll see how Tier 1 ends up panning out here. Like I said, when I was thinking ahead about what all decks I wanted to put where, I realized that there were a lot of decks that I thought were contenders for Tier 1. When it comes to Orcus variants, I think that, I might as well grab the other Orcus variants. We're talking about it here. Where is it? Here we go. So between Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi Orcus, Fiendsmith also including like the Millennium engine and stuff, I actually think Millennium Fiendsmith Orcus is slightly better than Mitsurugi Orcus. It's kind of one of those cases, and you'll see this a lot with decks that have a Mitsurugi variant and a non-Mitsurugi variant. You'll see that the difference is often that the Mitsurugi variant has a higher power end board, but is weaker to hand traps. Whereas in this case, Millennium Fiendsmith Orcus is not quite as strong of an end board, but has a lot more resilience through hand traps. Orcus in general in this meta is great at playing through stuff like Droll, but not as much Lancia. But again, Lancia is not a very popular tech right now. You still see people on it, but not nearly as much as you have in seasons past. So, but even if Lancia is around somewhat, I don't think that stops Orcus from being a Tier 1 deck. Same for Malice. I think Malice is also a Tier 1 deck. Yeah, in spite of the Appaloosa ban, it can still play through Nib. The Chessy Cat limit hurt, but it still definitely has enough resources to push through a lot of hand traps and keep going with its plays. So I kind of think that the thing, though, about Malice that did noticeably change with this ban list and with the new meta is that now you kind of have to pick your poison when you're doing your line, right? Like, you can do the line that plays through Nib, but that line is weaker to stuff like Ash and Droll. Or you can play through stuff like Ash Blossom and Droll, but that line will leave you susceptible to Nibiru, right? So now, rather than just being able to push through any hand trap, now you kind of have to pick and choose which hand traps you're leaving yourself weak to, which is just, obviously just fair and balanced, right? Malice being able to play through any hand trap pretty much and not care about them was definitely not okay. But I think it's still definitely a Tier 1 deck, and I think a little bit better than Orcus, but not by a ton now. Mitsurugi Fiendsmith. I think I might put this, Yeah, pure Mitsurugi and Mitsurugi Fiendsmith. I think I might actually save those for last, because even now I'm still trying to figure out exactly where I want to put them. Gem Knight. So I actually have Gem Knight separated into two different variants. I have pure, quote-unquote, pure Gem Knight. This is like the going second OTK build. And then I have Fiendsmith Gem Knight. Fiendsmith Gem Knight, I think, is an extremely solid Tier 2 deck. Even, I think, more so than Blue Eyes. I think this is actually going to be the top of Tier 2. Whereas the OTK variant, I think, is still pretty solid, but that I'm a little more inclined to put as Tier 3. Just because in the going second variant, you're gonna have to put up with these end boards that are only getting better / more consistent. So even if you're packing your deck full of hand traps, and I mean, that's just a thing of any going second deck, right? You can pack as many hand traps and board breakers as you want, but as the end boards get, not only more powerful but more layered, it becomes more and more difficult to push through them. But I think Fiendsmith Gem Knight just has a lot more flexibility as opposed to just always on the going second OTK strategy. Plus, if you look at which Gem Knight decks have been doing well in rating duels and tournaments and stuff, Fiendsmith Gem Knight is definitely performing a lot better than, quote-unquote pure Gem Knight, which is still a really solid deck, the going second one. I'm going to put it in Tier 3, but Fiendsmith Gem Knight I think is going to be the top of Tier 2, even above Blue Eyes. Let's see, Labyrinth I'll put in Tier 2, about the same position as Fiendsmith Control. Or do I want to put it in Tier 3? See, the thing that Lab kind of has going for it right now, and, this is actually something I've very consistently said about Labyrinth, right? That depending on the meta, you can just slot in normal trap cards that are good against whatever's popular right now. Right now, Lunalight is very popular. Naturally, Lab can slot in the destructive Duruma Karma Cannon, which it was already playing, let's be real. That is a great out to Liger Dancers. Or you could just throw up a D-Barrier and call Fusion. I think a lot of the reason why Lab wasn't being played as much recently is because there have been so many Link decks that are prominent right between stuff like Malice and Orchest, that you can't use D-Barrier to call Link, so people aren't as keen to use Labyrinth to try to get an edge against the meta. But, you know, with Mitsurugi you can call Ritual, with, you know, obviously the Lunalights you can call Fusion, and with Ryzeal you can call Xyz. There's still a lot of things you can counter with D-Barrier. Not that Labyrinth like 100% lives or dies by how good D-Barrier is against the meta, but as mentioned, it does kind of live or die by how good, in general, various normal trap cards are against the meta. I think normal trap cards are going to be, in general, a little bit better in this meta than they were previously. So, I think previously I put Lab in Tier 3, you'll put it at the bottom of Tier 2. Okay, Lunalight. This is one I debated on for quite a while, but after playing the deck myself, I think I have to put it at the top of Tier 2. I don't think I can call Lunalight a Tier 1 deck in Master Duel. That might be a little bit controversial to some people. I know a lot of people are like, but Liger Dancer, it's a tower, it's not affected, it blows up the board, they make 2 of them on top of other stuff, like, you know, you have to play specific text just to out Liger Dancer. But I'm actually going to stop you right there, because I don't think that's actually true. Because here's the thing, right? Liger Dancer is a very powerful piece of an end board, but it is a piece of an end board, meaning as with any other deck, it comes down to, more often than not, trying to disrupt their actual combo rather than worrying about the end board. You know, there are a lot of end boards out there that are, you know, would be quote unquote unbeatable, right? It's not just the Liger Dancer being unaffected. It's like, think about how much advantage Malice generates. Think about, you know, Detonator's endless pops, right? Now, I understand that there's a difference between playing through those and Liger, because Liger requires, rather than having enough effects to push through, a very specific type of effect to handle it. And in Best of One, you know, not everybody's going to want to play a Towers or, you know, some other kind of board breaker that can specifically affect the Liger Dancer. But like I said, after playing Lunalight myself, here's the thing that I think is really the kicker. Droll and Lockbird. Droll and Lockbird. Everybody's playing it. Because it's at 2, now it's a lot easier to slot into decks. You don't have to worry about making room for 3 copies or debating if 2 or 3 is better. Maybe not everybody did that, I did that a lot, but more than that, Droll and Lockbird is something that is useful against a lot of decks, while there is still a very nice handful of decks out there that can play through it. Which, all in all, is the perfect storm to mean Droll and Lockbird is very, very popular right now. Droll and Lockbird is also insanely good against Lunalight, and will often stop them from being able to make even one Liger Dancer. So, if Lunalight came out at a time where Droll wasn't popular, 1, Droll would probably become popular as a result, but 2, then I might be more inclined to call Lunalight a Tier 1 deck, but for the time being, I'm going to put it right at the top of Tier 2, next to decks like Fiendsmith, Gem Knight, and Blue Eyes. I think that's pretty fair. I think a lot of people might agree with that, but again, if you disagree, I don't fault you. I actually totally see where you're coming from. And I debated, like I said, there was a world where I put Lunalight in Tier 1, but again, after playing the deck myself a little bit and seeing how weak it is to hand traps compared to some other decks, even if the end board is really, really strong, I have to say it's a Tier 2 deck. Okay, next up is Dragon Maid. Obviously, with the new support, Dragon Maid has been quite popular, and it's also quite good. I'm a little tempted to put it at the end of Tier 3, but I think really at the end of the day, I gotta put it in Rogue. It's close though. This is, I think, one of the closest Dragon Maid has ever been to being tiered, which in a meta like this is a huge compliment, right? With Malice and Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi, now Lunalight too, all this stuff running around, for Dragon Maid to still actually almost be tier worthy is a huge feat. And I don't know, I think that I can see an argument for it being tier 3. Like, I almost just now put it back in here because I think about it compared to stuff like Yubel. But I think it is a little bit weaker than stuff like Yubel or Mathmech just because the end board doesn't put up as many disruptions. It's not quite as powerful, right? But still a very good deck. Okay, next up we have Onomatopoeia Ryzeal. So I've seen some people say that they don't think Ryzeal is like good anymore, like period. That it was being carried by Ouroboros, Hand Dripping, and Baguska. I am kind of baffled by that. I don't think that could be further from the truth. I think that Ryzeal and its variants are absolutely still tier 1. Onomatopoeia Ryzeal, I'm trying to think if I think it's better than Orchestra or not. I think it's really close. Like, I think I'm going to put it here, and I think I'm going to put Mitsurugi Ryzeal maybe here? I'm kind of tempted to put it here, though. I'm not going to lie. Listen, like I said before, the line between tier 1 and tier 2 is pretty thin, and even among tier 1, all of these decks, like if you said any one of them was the best in the current meta, I think there would be a really solid argument behind that. But I think I'm going to keep it like this for now. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep it like that for now. Okay, Branded. You know, it's funny, Branded and Lab always kind of end up in the same spot, whether it's like end of tier 2, upper tier 3, but they're both very solid control decks with very, very extensive resource loops that have been managing to stay very relevant to the meta. Branded, of course, also will be getting more support at some point in the future, which will definitely keep it tier 2 relevant. All right, Tenpai, I gotta put it pretty much around the same place as Going Second Gem Knight for a lot of the same reasons, right? Oh, I'm sorry about that, excuse me. Yeah, no, Going Second decks, I think as time goes on in this meta in particular, it's a little bit rougher going second. I mean, especially against stuff like Lunalight, and, you know, all the various tier 1 decks, but I think that these are still, of course, very, very good decks. I think one is necessarily, like, notably better than the other. I think Tenpai is probably a little bit better than the Going Second Gem Knight, and I think Crystron is actually better than both. So yeah, that looks good to me. Okay, yeah, this is I think one of the tougher ones to place for me. Pure Fiendsmith and Mitsurugi Fiendsmith. I personally think Mitsurugi Fiendsmith is a little bit better, because it has a lot more flexibility under Droll and Lockbird, right? The Fiendsmith line, if you go into it with Moon, doesn't care about Droll at all, doesn't play into it whatsoever. And while Pure Mitsurugi does have access to more of the Mitsurugi tools, like the Wosu, the Kaiju, you know, the Magatama, that kind of stuff, I kind of think the Fiendsmith engine is more of a benefit, but it's definitely debatable. I think that regardless of where I put these are roughly the same spot on the tier list. I'm just trying to figure out if they go at the bottom of tier 1 or somewhere towards the top of tier 2. I don't know. I guess the question is, do I think Pure Mitsurugi / Fiendsmith Mitsurugi is better than Lunalight? That is such a difficult question to answer. I feel like they're two totally different types of decks in terms of how they play out and, like, what makes them so threatening, right? Because again, with Lunalight, it's the end board. It's the Liger Dancer that makes it so threatening. But Mitsurugi, it's not necessarily the end board itself, but just its ability to play through hand traps and boards, and almost no matter what it has to play through, still putting up something really threatening. Whereas Lunalight, again, it's a little bit more feast or famine. If it goes through the combo line, you're almost untouchable. If it doesn't, you just lose, right? I don't know. I think that volatility makes me feel like Mitsurugi variants are a little bit better. Pure and Fiendsmith are a little bit better than Lunalight, but that still begs the question, do these go at the bottom of tier 1? Or do these go at the top of tier 2? Wow, this is difficult. Wow, this is really difficult. I think I am going to leave it like this. Yeah, I think it's really, really close. I think it's super close. This might even be the closest, like, I've ever come to, like, debating if a deck is tier 1 or not. So, yeah, I think I am going to leave it like this. I think the thing about Mitsurugi, again, is just the fact that it can play through so much, especially Pure, is so malleable. You know, if Lunalight started to get really, really popular, Pure Mitsurugi could just main 3 Wosu, which some people are already doing anyway, because that card is really solid. Yeah, I think for me, flexibility / consistency is going to win out over power in a best of one format in particular. If this was best of 3, then I think we'd be having a totally different conversation, obviously, for multiple reasons, right? But yeah, I think for best of 1, I'm solid with this. But again, there are so many different placements here that I wouldn't argue against. So let me know what you think in the comments below, because I think that this meta, almost more so than any other I've seen in Master Duel, is really up in the air as far as like what is actually considered meta and really good to play right now. But regardless of what you think, thank you so very much for watching all the way to the end, even if you just skipped to see where I put everything. I'm glad that you were curious enough to check the video out, so thank you. I really appreciate you supporting. Speaking of support, we have some lovely YouTube members and patrons to thank, so let's move on to our outro so we can do that. Hey everybody, Hexlex here. Thank you so very much for watching all the way to the very end of the video, which by the way is one of the best ways to support the channel. Speaking of supporting the channel, take a look at the names on screen. These are folks who have been so generous as to either join as a YouTube member or subscribe over on patreon.com/Hexlex to support. There's also perks for doing so. If you would like to see YouTube videos early, as well as some exclusive videos that get uploaded to YouTube, but for one reason or another I decide not to publish, definitely go ahead and hit that join button to see content early, as well as some exclusive content. If you're looking for more exclusive content, over on patreon.com, I upload exclusive videos that are not posted on YouTube just about every single day. Whether you choose to subscribe over on Patreon, join as a YouTube member, or simply continue to watch, your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you so very much. But for now, this is Hexlex. I am signing out, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.